Anything Ghost, number 243. Welcome to Anything Ghost. My name is Lex Wall. Anything Ghost is a place where people share their personal paranormal experiences, aka ghost stories, and then I read them to you over the show. If you have one you want to share, either send it to lex@anythingghost.com or go to the website and fill out the form, anythingghost.com. A message from the dead at Mesa Cemetery, the house on Somerville Drive, a haunted car dealership, and much more coming your way in number 243. Sammy in Florida? The tall, dark figure. Recently, I moved to Florida and moved in with my fiancé and his biological mom. I've been here about 4 months now. Recently, for the past 3 to 5 weeks, I've been having what I thought were hallucinations. The things I've seen don't just appear for a few seconds and then go away as if my eyes were doing that. I've seen them and stared at them for minutes on end, and they finally disappear. The first time this happened, it was what looked like a man standing at the side of the bed, staring at me. I'm saying this is a person, but when I've seen this figure, all that is visible is the shape of a body. It's just black. There are no eyes, mouth, or features, just a tall black figure. When I first saw this, I stared at it for at least 3 to 5 minutes before it went away. I let it go thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. A couple of nights later, for whatever reason, I saw a giant flat-screen TV that was stretched across from the farthest corner of the china cabinet against the left wall. When I saw this, I stared at it for a few minutes, and it went away. Again, I told myself I had to have been going crazy, and that maybe I was hallucinating because of stress or something. I continued to have these hallucinations for a good week or two, before I finally told my fiancé what was going on. He put it off, saying that my eyes were playing tricks on me. After I told him, I continued to have the experiences. When my fiancé went out of town to do a job for his adoptive parents, I finally spoke to my mother-in-law about it. We'd had many discussions about paranormal experiences and special feelings in the past. She said she believed that I may be special like her, as far as the feelings and sightings of paranormal things go. She told me that most of the time when you see something and it's there for more than a minute, it means it's actually there and happening, and it's not just a hallucination or your eyes playing tricks. Of course, neither of us understood why I'd be seeing a giant flat-screen TV in my room. But when it came to seeing a black man-like figure, it scared me a little bit. And carrying on with the bedtime theme, here's a story from Michael in Elmira, Ontario, Canada. Beautiful bedside phantom. I had just picked up my daughter, Emily, for the weekend. It was a warm summer evening. On the long drive home, we always listen to Anything Ghost. She is 10 and an inspiring paranormal investigator, since she has seen ghosts her whole life. She always has stories and drawings of ghostly beings. She sees them. However, this one story is one that truly upset her. After we got to my apartment after the drive, we had some lemonade and played a little Minecraft, until it was time to settle in for the night. At 3 a.m., she came into my room and shook me awake. "Daddy, Daddy, wake up!" she shouted. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" I replied. "Yes, I'm okay," she stated. "But I was worried about you. I think you should sleep in my room tonight, Dad." I got a pillow and made a cozy spot next to her bed, and asked again what was wrong. She then told me the story. She got up to use the bathroom, and as she walked past my room, she saw a beautiful and very tall woman standing next to the bed. She was leaning over me. She said she stopped and was frozen. She wanted to talk, but felt like she couldn't. She was very scared at this point. The ghost then stood up and turned toward her, then backed away from the bed and faded into the air. That was when she flipped on the light switch and woke me up. Neither of us slept the rest of the night. We chatted with the lights on until the sun came up. And this is a story from Julia in London, UK. A message from the dead at Mesa Cemetery. Me and my husband are British, and we were on vacation the past 2 weeks in Arizona. We were doing all the usual Grand Canyon tourist stuff and having a great time. We also love aviation history, so we visited the commemorative Air Force Museum in Mesa to check out their warplanes. The friendly docent, an elderly guy named Rick, who was also a U.S. veteran, explained to us that the museum was built on an old airbase founded by the British Royal Air Force in 1941. He went on to tell us that 23 trainee British pilots had died there in air accidents between 1941 and 1944. He explained that the pilots were all buried together in Mesa Cemetery, which was just a few miles down the road. The next morning we decided to pay our respects at the pilots' graves, seeing as it was close to Veterans Day and also the British Remembrance Day, which is commemorated every 11th of November. I should tell you that in the UK, many Brits buy a little red paper poppy from the veterans' charity, the Royal British Legion. We pin the poppies to our jackets to show our respect for the fallen. During this visit, I happened to have one of the poppies with me, and I suggested to my husband that we leave one of the poppies there for the British soldiers. There were 4 beautiful wreaths at the main memorial stone in front of the 23 graves, so I pushed the little plastic stalk of the poppy into the ground in front of them. It looked very pretty there, and we stared at it for a while. After 20 minutes or so of reading the gravestone inscriptions, we both headed out of the cemetery and found a place to get coffee. While we were waiting, I got out my iPhone to check my email. I was shocked to find that, even though my phone had been switched off, there was a note in my message app. It was very weird, because my iPhone can only be activated with a 4-digit code number, and it turns itself off every 5 minutes. In the app, you could see that the last thing I had typed was a message to my husband in lobby. That was just after breakfast. My husband had left the hotel to get gas, and I was waiting for him to come back and pick me up from the lobby. When he did, I jumped in the car and switched off my iPhone completely. So we were very shocked to see a cryptic message in my app that read, very, PLPHAS, poppy, period, yes. I think maybe this means very, very, please, poppy, yes. Perhaps the yes is because I did put the poppy down. It's also weird because there's a full stop, period, before yes. And that's strange because on my phone you have to hold down 2 keys to do that. I'm glad I left that poppy there because someone definitely wanted it as a reminder of home. But somehow it is very unnerving. A story from Leah in Independence, Missouri. Kansas City Ghost. This happened in the autumn of 2015. Earlier in that year, in the middle of summer, I had moved into a duplex at the edge of a suburb near Kansas City. I had known the landlord before I rented the place, so I knew that before I moved in, the entire house had been redone because most of the interior had been destroyed in a fire. That is all I knew about the history of the building. That fall, I began to date someone. He worked a job that required him to leave work very early in the morning. He didn't live with me at the time, and so he didn't have keys to my apartment. But he would often stay the night. On the mornings after he stayed over, he would wake up around 5 a.m., say goodbye, and then I would sleep for another hour or so before getting up for work. I was no good at getting out of bed on time in those days, so on that particular morning, when I heard my alarm clock sound, I quickly slammed the snooze button and continued to lie in bed. Then, at the foot of my bed, I heard a voice urgently say, "Psst." My eyes bolted open. I was thinking maybe my boyfriend had not left yet and was coming back to get me out of bed. But when I looked around, no one else was in the room. I scrambled out of bed and began looking around the apartment for my boyfriend. It was an incredibly small place, so it didn't take me long to realize he was not there. I peered out the front window and noticed his car was gone. What had made that noise to get me out of bed? I peered toward the front door and realized the deadbolt was engaged. This year, I moved into a house. A few small things have happened at that house since I moved in, but nothing truly noteworthy, in my opinion. There are a lot of supposedly haunted spots here, and I plan to check some of them out. If I come across anything paranormal or unexplained, I'll be sure to share it with you. And, here's another one. This one's from Cassandra in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. Bedside Ghost. I grew up in a home that was built in the late 1800s. Hearing unexplainable activity in our home was not uncommon. I've had many paranormal experiences throughout my life, not just limited to my childhood home. Last night, I had my first physical paranormal experience. My husband works early nights and sleeps into the evening. I had just finished making dinner and walked into our room to wake him up. After taking 3 or 4 steps into the completely blackened room, I felt a brush against my side. I assumed he was awake already, and I outstretched my arm, expecting to feel him. When I realized he wasn't there, I stepped back and felt my breath leave my lungs. I've never had such a powerful experience, and I didn't know how to react. I froze, gathered myself, and woke my husband, not mentioning what had just happened. Much like my childhood home, we have heard things in our own home in the past. Normally, I take my experiences in stride, as they have been happening for so long. However, this left me rattled. I'm still reeling over what had happened. It felt as though I had startled someone or something that was standing at our bedside.
Hello, Lex and Anything Ghost listeners. My name is Jessica. I am from Charlotte, North Carolina, but I lived in Weston, Florida from the time I was born to the time I was 12. And we lived in a house that my parents say was built on an Indian burial ground. And I believe them, because they would not just say that. And actually the whole town of Weston, we come to find out, was built on an Indian burial ground. So that probably is why this house I lived in was very strange. It wasn't that old. I remember as a kid feeling like it was a new house. So we moved in there when I was probably I don't even remember. So I was probably pretty young, maybe 4 or 5 years old. And so this house was just really interesting. It was one story, probably 1,700 square feet. We had a pool in the backyard, a really nice backyard. We had a big windows lining the living room, and we also, it was a very open floor plan. So there was a kitchen, and then another room, and then the living room, and then a long hall that led to my brother and mine's room, which were separate. And then down the hall on the right was my parents' room. So we were pretty separate. It felt like my brother and I had one part of the house and my parents had another. And so this house was just really weird. You would kind of feel like at nighttime, if you went to go get a drink or something, you did not want to be out there at all, even if you weren't alone. Even if I had friends staying over, my brother and I would bravely go to the kitchen and get a snack. It felt like a terrifying experience. And I don't know if I chalk that up to being a kid and being afraid of the dark, but my brother's a pretty big dude. I mean, he was probably 6 feet tall when he was in 9th grade. And so even when I was a kid, he was afraid. And it's just, he's not afraid of much. And we would see light orbs in this house. It was very strange. You didn't even have to take a picture to see them. And they would be just floating in the room. And it was in one particular room they would be a lot, and that was in our, what we would consider our den, which is separate from the living room and near the kitchen. And the lights would also just flicker. And I mean, South Florida, it has storms and things like that, but the lights would flicker in broad daylight when there was nothing wrong, nothing going on. It was very strange. Anyway, so the first incident I want to talk about happened after my uncle passed away. He passed away tragically. He actually took his own life, which was very sad, and my family was very devastated over this. He had been sick for a long time, and so that just kind of made it even more heartbreaking. And so when he passed away, I was about 8 years old. And a side note, I just want to say that I consider myself to be a little bit sensitive to the paranormal world. I can't see things like a medium or anything, but chances are if there's something paranormal happening, it's happening around me. My mom said when I was a kid, I used to talk to my grandmother, who I never even met before, and I knew her name and stuff. So I was that kid who, would say, "Who's that man?" And my mom would get nervous and tell me no one was there. Anyway, moving on. So I was about 8 years old, and I was playing in my room, and my parents were fighting. They were going at it. And my father was yelling at my mother, and he was just saying, it's time to move on. I'm so sorry that your brother has passed, but it's been, a while. You really gotta move on. Because my mom had been very upset about this, as you would imagine. And my dad had just worried that she was giving up on life because that's how it seemed to be playing out. And when they were arguing, I was just sitting in my room with the door open, listening like most kids do. And all of a sudden, our closet door that's in the hallway, so my brother's room is on the left and mine is on the right, and then there's like a circular area where and that leads out to the hallway, and there's a closet. And so the closet just like rips open, like somebody, and I saw it happen. It just rips open, and all of a sudden these boxes come crashing down, and pictures of my uncle and my other family members like flew across the floor and the room and everything. And I don't even remember what happened after that. I don't know why, but my mom said, my parents came running out of their room. This is what I was told. And Dylan, my brother, came running out of his room, and we all just kind of stood there and looked at each other. And I said, that was my uncle. That was Uncle. And my mom just looked at me, and she felt this incredible sense of peace and relief. And I think the whole house did. It was a very interesting feeling. And now I don't know if that is related to the other paranormal events going on in the home. That may have just been my uncle trying to give us a sign that he was okay and that my mom, could find peace, and he was giving her permission to do so. But this next event is not heartwarming like that at all. So I was lying in bed, and I slept with my door open like most kids, in case I needed my mom. And it was storming, and it was late. It was nighttime, and everyone was asleep. All the lights were off in the house. And it was just storming like crazy. And I was looking, because out of my window at home, in my room, I could see the backyard. Because if you were laying in my bed and looking out of my bedroom door, you could see the living room, and right outside of the living room was the backyard. It led to it with sliding glass doors. So there was lots of, ways that I could see outside from where I was laying in my room. And I was just looking out the window, and I was watching these the grass smack up against the window because it was windy. It was a really nasty night. And while I'm looking, I look into the dining room, which was right next to the living room. I could see that from my room as well. And there's this girl standing there in this long white dress. And I was so scared. I did not know what to do. I was wide-eyed and staring at this girl. And she had her hands on her face, and she had long black hair. And she didn't look happy. And I didn't see her face because her hands were covering her face. But I just remember feeling she was really sad. And I sat up, and I was just looking at this person, just so bewildered. It did not once cross my mind, what is this person doing in my house? I was just, I was about probably 8 years old still at this time, and oh my gosh. And so she started to turn around towards me, and her hands started to leave her face. And I shut my eyes, and I went under the covers, and I did not move until morning. And it was terrifying. I was so scared. I was beside myself. And I didn't really tell anybody, because as a kid, for some reason, I guess I used to tell a lot of stories so nobody would ever believe me. Well, I was not crying wolf this time. I was scared. And after that, I'm pretty sure I started sleeping with my door closed. And I don't know, it was just really weird living in that house. Like you would always find that things were never quite the way you left them. Like if I, left my toys out, they would be like in a different way than they were when I got home. It was just really weird, and I wasn't the only one who thought so. And just besides that, side note, we used to go to this fair every year in Weston, and my parents would get in such an awful fight every time we went that, they'd almost get, divorced. It was so bad. And then we realized that it's because it's on an Indian burial ground, and maybe something just does not want people there. Because the fights, and whenever, wasn't always a fight. Sometimes somebody would get, hurt. I actually hurt my arm. I fell on top of a ride and, sliced my arm open. And we had to leave. It would just always be something to get us to leave. And we would always, and the second we left, we were fine. So that whole town is weird. Florida is not my favorite place anyway. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that's all I got about that house. So thank you for listening. I know it's not as extravagant as other stories. And take care.
Are you looking for a last-minute gift for that Anything Ghost fan? Well, here's an idea. Buy them a membership to the Anything Ghost VIP group. There's a one-time membership fee, and they'll have complete access to the Anything Ghost archives dating back to that very first show on January of 2006. We're coming up on the 12-year anniversary at the end of January. You don't have to worry about standing in line or shipping fees. Just go to anythingghost.com and then click or choose or tap the Join the VIP group for more information. www.anythingghost.com. Join the VIP group. It's a story from Kyle in Napa, California. Haunted car dealership. I work at a car dealership in beautiful Napa, California, and this place gives me the creeps. Above the sales floor is a set of bathrooms and the employee break room. Every time I go up there, I get the biggest sense of fear, like I'm being watched. This feeling seems to originate from a closet, of which the door would occasionally slowly open on its own, at the back of the break room that leads into the upstairs portion of the parts department, where I also get the same feeling whenever I am there. At the back of this lot is a building that is a host to several garage-like rooms. One of these rooms is used as a storage and holds our air compressor. My first project at this job was cleaning up and organizing this room. Whenever I was there for an extended period of time, I would get the feeling that I was being watched. And it seemed to be coming from a large alcove storage space that was above me. The only way to access this space was by ladder, which we did not have. At the back of the space was a door that led into the next room, except if you walked through that door, you'd fall 10 to 15 feet into the next room, as there was no adjoining alcove. One day I went into the other room, looked up, and saw the door was open. It wasn't like that the day before, and I'm the only person that works back there. And again, we did not have a ladder. My time here is almost up, as I'm being transferred to a dealership that is closer to my home. I will miss working in this beautiful town, but I will not miss working in this creepy building. Here's a story from Kaylee in Virginia. Aubrey's Ghost. I got my bachelor's degree in music at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. During my sophomore year, I was sharing a room in the dorms with one of my best friends. Halfway through the fall semester, we decided that neither of us could stand to spend another year living in the dorms, and that if we rented an apartment together, we could save a lot of money and have our own space. We made plans to view apartments together and ended up looking at a lot of different places. After several places that were too far, too expensive, or just did not seem safe, we settled on a second-floor apartment in a beautiful old tree-lined neighborhood, which was very close to the university's music building and bus lines. The building was a little run down, but it had a lot of character. In fact, the realtor told us that it was one of the oldest buildings in the neighborhood. Even better, all of the apartments had enclosed sun porches, and there was free internet. We were absolutely thrilled by the prospect of moving in at the beginning of the next school year. We finally did move in. We continued to be totally in love with the apartment. It had a wonderful homey feel about it, and it was very peaceful. However, shortly after we moved in, we began to notice that we weren't alone. Things would move around the apartment when we weren't home, and sometimes we would get home from class and feel like the apartment had been tidied up, even though neither of us remembered doing it. Our neighbors would also mention that our cooking smelled good, even though we had actually been away for hours. We started half joking that we were living with a spirit, who, for some reason, we started calling Aubrey. Whenever something got lost and we couldn't find it, we would say, "Aubrey, could you please help us find the mailbox key?" Or, "Aubrey, it would be cool if you could give back the can opener." Without fail, it would turn up shortly thereafter. It sort of became an affectionate joke with us, as well as our entire group of close friends. Whenever we left the house, we would always say, "Bye, Aubrey. Please take care of the house for us." As it got closer to Halloween, we started noticing more and more weird little things. Our cabinet doors would swing open by themselves very often, even though they were held closed with magnets. We kept boxes of cereal on top of the refrigerator, and they would fall off the top of the refrigerator for no reason, sometimes in the middle of the night. One evening, I was getting down one of those boxes for my roommate because I had pushed it too far back for her to reach by accident. As we were both looking at the box, and I was about to reach up, we both saw the box scoot itself a good 6 inches forward. To this day, I have no explanation. There was no sound, and we never historically had problems with mice or anything. We just assumed it was Aubrey trying to be useful. This wasn't even the strangest thing that happened. One night, my roommate was in her bed with the lights off. It wasn't too late, but we had both had very stressful days and decided to go to bed early. I must have fallen asleep, because all I remember was being awakened by my roommate saying my name. The walls were so thin, I could hear her voice like she was in the same room. She didn't sound scared, just kind of confused. I came running into her room to make sure she was okay, and she asked me if I had been in her room. I told her that I had been asleep until she had said my name. She had been lying awake in her bed, feeling stressed out about school and some problems, when suddenly she felt a hand on her shoulder. It didn't feel threatening or anything. It was like someone was trying to reassure her. As usual, we just assumed it was Aubrey trying to be supportive. A whole year passed with more of the same odd little occurrences. A friend stayed over at our apartment on Christmas and remarked how cozy and pleasant our place was. She said that even though she was one of the only people in the whole building for a good 4 weeks, she never felt scared or even lonely. It was like someone was there with her, quietly keeping her company. During winter of last year, my roommate was lying awake in her room again, and she felt the same hand on her shoulder. This time she said, "Aubrey, please don't do that again. It's too scary." And the feeling stopped. We have both since graduated, but we are both still in touch and talk about how much we loved living in that apartment. We never felt afraid to be there by ourselves, and we never worried about anyone breaking in. We both wonder what Aubrey is up to, and wonder if she's playing any particularly good pranks on the new renters. A story from Philippa in Germany. Haunting at Hoo Lake in Plymouth, England. I grew up in Cornwall, England, and when I was about 12, I was camping in a field at a place called Hoo Lake near Plymouth, England. It was with our girl guide group and a few other troops for a long weekend of hiking, orienteering, and such. We'd settled in for the night in our tent, and there were 5 of us sharing a ridge tent, which is like a traditional canvas tent with a rectangular apex. This was nearly 30 years ago, so we had to make do with a leaky canvas and no attached ground sheet. I awoke in the night because I was really cold. I felt like someone was looking at me, so I popped my head out of my sleeping bag and looked toward my feet. Standing at my feet was a small boy, I'd say around 10 years old. He was wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothes, possibly something a small boy would wear in the 1940s. He was kind of gray, blue color, and he was looking at me. I was absolutely petrified, and I pulled my sleeping bag over my head and dared not look out. I tried to wake the girl next to me, but she just lay there snoring and didn't stir. I eventually fell back to sleep. The next morning, I didn't tell anybody what had happened. I assumed that I'd probably just dreamt the whole thing, although I still was very scared. We went home that day, and over time I forgot about it. About 3 years later, I was in English literature class at school. We had to write a piece about a ghost story, and if possible, a real one. I didn't write mine down about the little boy, because I feared my classmates would think I was crazy. As the professor went around the class having us read out the stories, a male classmate spoke about an encounter he'd had in the middle of the night. It was in the camping field at Hoo Lake near Plymouth, a few months earlier. The story he read was almost identical to mine. I had never told anyone. My other story comes via my aunt and uncle. My uncle used to be the head gardener at a large country house estate in Cornwall, England, and he lived with my aunt and their dog, Jason, in a very old house by the river Tamar. One day my parents and I had gone over there for dinner. My mom had left to go upstairs to use the bathroom. When she came back down and into the dining room, she looked very spooked. As she'd been coming down the stairs, she felt and heard the dog following behind her. She assumed it was Jason and that he had followed her upstairs before. But Jason had been under the table with us the whole time and was still there when she came into the room. On other occasions, my uncle had recounted to us that he'd seen the figure of a man leaning over the gate at the entrance of their driveway. The first time he'd seen them, he assumed it was the neighbor, and he'd gone over to say hello. But as he walked toward him, the man just disappeared. This happened several times. I live in Germany now, and I've always believed in ghosts, as does my partner. In his parents' house in a small village in northern Germany, both he and I have had a couple of strange occurrences. One time he was sitting in his bedroom, and his braces, I think you call them suspenders in the U.S., were hanging over the beam in the room. He was with his then-girlfriend, and the 2 dangling ends of the braces moved inward toward each other very slowly, and then back out to hang down. They both saw it happen, and his girlfriend then refused to go into that room ever again. More recently, we were both standing at the other end of the same house, and the door we were standing next to flung open very sharply. There were no windows, no main doors open, and the door does not usually move or swing on its own. Also, when we were downstairs, we would often hear footsteps in the rooms upstairs when nobody else was home. It doesn't really bother either of us, as the general feeling in the house is good.
Hi there, Lex and Anything Ghost listeners. My name is Anthony, and I'm from Texas. I have a few stories here. So the first one is by far the spookiest one, and the event happened when I was little, like 10 or 11 years old, but I didn't find out the potentially paranormal side of it until actually a couple years ago. So it's my friend and I were like 10 years old, and we're on the street that I grew up on, and we're really close. You know, there's a pretty tight-knit group, just me and two other guys. They're about the same age, and we were in the same grade, and they're thick as thieves. Every spare moment we got, we'd be running into the other's house or running around outside. And I don't remember why, but today it was just two of us, or this day it was only two of us. And so we're running around playing pretend, and how it usually would go is we go out to play, and as it's starting to get dark, one of our parents would step out to watch us for that last little bit of daylight, and then once it was late enough or dark enough, they'd say, all right, come on, and let's go inside, and then just watch as each child made their way home, because all of our houses were within eyesight of one another. And so it's, typical day. I think it was in the summer, because I was spending the night at that friend's house, and that generally doesn't happen during a school week. And so we're playing, and his mom steps out to watch us, and it's getting dim, but it's not dark yet. And all of a sudden, his mom calls us over, and we're kind of confused, and she's telling us it's time to come inside. And so we come running over and get to her, and I remember this now. I remember getting to her, and she looked afraid. That's highly unusual for this family in particular. My friend and his brother and his parents, I've never ever once, other than in that moment, seen them afraid of anything. They're very well educated, very rational people. They're hard to scare, and she looked afraid. So that's unusual. And being a 10-year-old, I just kind of ran inside, did what I was told, and 5 minutes later I forgot about it. Fast forward about 10 years, and I was having a conversation with my mom, and she talked about going to lunch with my friend's mom, and they got on the topic of paranormal ghost stuff, and come to find out, my friend's mom divulged to my mom that she's had some paranormal instances before, and those are great stories that's wrong to call them stories. It happened to her, and she's not fond of them, and I don't have permission to go into those, so I won't touch that subject. But she did bring up that evening, talking about calling us in early, and, once we started talking about it, I remembered that evening. That memory was buried. It didn't matter, but it just kind of slowly came back, and I just remembered one odd evening where we were called in early, because other than that instance, it was that same rule where we're out till dark, basically. And so she's talking about it, and she tells my mom that she came outside to watch us, and heard us inside once it got dark, and as she was watching us, out of the corner of her eye on one side of the street, there was a dark figure in the bushes, or like behind the bushes, watching us. And she said she couldn't make out the details out of the corner of her eye. And when she looked to see what was there was nothing there at all. And then she looked back at us, and in the corner of her eye, there it was again, that dark shape. And she said from what little bit she could make out, it looked like a man, and that's all she could really tell, was just this dark man. And she said there was just an evil presence feeling kind of emanating from the figure. And so, of course, that's freaky enough to scare you. And then she's looking looking at us, and out of the corner of her eye on the opposite side of the street, then there's this light-haired woman, she says. And there was more of a protective sense. I think that kind of put those fears to rest. But the other figure was scary enough to call us in early. And just thinking about that, I can imagine. And with both figures, it was the same. She could see them out of the corner of her eye looking at us. But when she looked to those spots, those figures were gone. And thinking back to that now as an adult, as just imagining myself as an oblivious child and looking at it from the adult's perspective, it is terrifying. And it is terrifying to me to know that happened. And, I would not even suggest that she was making this up. This is the kind of family that are very honest, and pretty much anything they are going to tell me, I will believe 100%. And that's not something to take lightly. I don't just believe people off of nothing. So that's my first story. That was, it happened to me kind of indirectly. Didn't know about it till past few years, but all the same, it freaks me out thinking about it, honestly. So, second story is hard to classify as paranormal in my mind, because there could be something going on that I'm just simply unaware of, but that still could be in that realm. So there is a legend in San Antonio that there's a spot of railroad tracks that apparently in the 60s there was a school bus full of children, got stuck on the tracks, got hit by a train, and all the children died. And as the legend goes, if you go around midnight and turn off your car and sit on the tracks, the ghosts of those children will push you over, and you're supposed to be able to put flour on your bumper and see handprints from the children, which I think that part's a load of malarkey. But the pushing part is interesting. So, and this is why. It was me, my mom, my aunt, and my uncle. And my mom, my uncle, and we were all, definitely skeptic. My mom doesn't want to see anything paranormal, like physically see it. Even doing this little thing here, in this story, freaked her out. And she believes that because she truly doesn't want to see anything, she's just absolutely not going to see anything. She's completely closed off to it, which I agree with that. My uncle is more of a skeptic than I am, as in, he's not intrigued. He just flat out doesn't believe in the paranormal. And he is very factual, well-educated. He's gonna, if he believes something, he can back it up with evidence and fact, generally speaking. So, and then there's me, who I've already said I'm somewhat of a skeptic. And this was in high school, before I was really much open to the paranormal. This was when I was more afraid of it. And so it freaked me out then. And we get there to the railroad tracks about midnight. We'd been up there on a road trip. I think it was New Year's. We'd taken a trip. And so my mom pulls up, and she's driving. We were in her 4Runner, her SUV. So it's kind of a heavy vehicle, and we've got 3 adults and then a high schooler in it. So we pull up, and she stops at the white painted X that's before every railroad track, puts her SUV in neutral, lets her foot off the gas, and we start rolling forward. And we roll up and over the tracks. And I say up and over because leading up to the railroad tracks, when you get to that X, it's kind of at the base of a small hill. Kind of steep, honestly, but it's small nonetheless. And so you have to go up against gravity, up this hill to the top of the railroad tracks and back down. And physics doesn't make sense that a heavy SUV full of people can stop and then roll forward like that and go up a hill. So, that's pretty crazy. But then my uncle brings up a point that I guess there's a mechanism. I don't know much about this, but I'm not really a gearhead. But he says in cars that if you're in neutral and you take your foot off the brake, there's a mechanism that'll push your car forward just on its own. And that makes sense. I just, I've been in neutral before and I start rolling. And that could be simple gravity. But all the same, we're like, all right, fair point. Pull back around. We try it again, stop at the X, but this time my mom takes the key out of the ignition entirely. So the car is off. And we're there, and she lets her foot off the brake, and there we go, up that hill again. Up the hill, over the tracks, down the other side, rolling, cruising. And then my uncle's wired, because he's like, how the heck is this happening? So we pull back around again, because he wants to do a little test. So he takes a bottle of water, and he gets out, and gets at the top of the top of the little hill, on the tracks, pours the water, and watches it trail down away from the tracks, behind us. And that's what I can't explain. Everything says we should roll backwards. Everything says we shouldn't go up that hill. but then we stop the car and turn it off entirely. There is no mechanisms other than the brakes themselves, which are released, and we're rolled over that hill. And someone recently brought up to me there could be a magnetic something in the railroad tracks that could pull the car, which that's believable. I don't know enough about railroad tracks, but it's logical enough that I could believe that. And being somewhat of a skeptic, I'm more prone to believe that than ghosts pushed us. But it's still an odd event, all the same. Because I don't know enough to explain it, it's odd to me. And so those are my two stories. I've got one more. I wouldn't necessarily classify it as paranormal. I would definitely say this one was more odd than anything, and this happened more recently, just in the past few months. Because right now I work in a department store as an overnight stalker. I unload the truck, yada yada. And so it's like I go in about 3 a.m, and I'm driving through a good 20 to 25 minutes of rural Texas, just open fields. There's cows and horses and very heavily wooded areas. But where I work is a pretty dense city. It's Tyler, Texas, and it's kind of small, but it's dense. They have a lot in there, a lot of shopping centers, houses, schools. And I grew up in Houston, so I'm used to packed areas, but this area is packed. So you get in there, there's not much trees. And I lay this all out because I was running late one morning, so it's a little after 3 o'clock in the morning, and I mentioned that because I know that's an odd time just for strange things to happen. And there's one road that's very straight, like you can see pretty much the whole way down except for some slight hills, but even then they don't block much. They just kind of block the actual street itself, and it's not very well lit. There's maybe 3 streetlights along the whole length of the road. And so I'm coming up, I'm at a stoplight, and a good 200 to 300 yards ahead of me, one of those streetlights is illuminating just a single corner. And I'm sitting there, and this shape comes into that light, and I'm looking at it because it's a pretty good distance away. Can't see it really hardly, but the way it moved was really strange. I'm likely to think that it's a deer or a dog because we're in a neighborhood area. We're in Texas, kind of around some rural areas. There are going to be some deer, and so that's my first thought. But I'm watching it move, and as it comes into the light, it takes a good 3 bounds. I'm going to call them bounds. It like kind of leaps in, and every bound is an exaggerated arc. It's almost like it has too much airtime, and I don't know how else to explain that. It just looks incredibly thin, like very long legs and a very, very lean body, and then it stops in the light on the corner, and it's like it's on alert. It stops and it's looking, and the way it stances, it's kind of leaned forward. That aggressive stance, kind of like a Doberman. It's very forward, ears up, and the lines are very much like a Doberman, just harsh back and straight up pointed ears, down and very square muzzle. But this thing doesn't, I guess it could have easily just been a Doberman, but the proportions looked all wrong from what I could see. And the only reason I don't question the clarity of what I saw is because it was dark all the way, and then there's this light spot, and it's kind of raised up, that area is, and so it's a very clear view of what was right there. And then it's just trees behind it. So I came up on that spot, and the thing is gone. It took off way before I could get there. But I'm looking, and there's not a very heavily wooded area. It's surrounded by apartments and houses. So I don't know what could potentially be living there. And what I have in my memory of the creature, I tried to Google some animals to see what might be. I just Googled like long-legged wolf or deer. And the thing closest to my memory that came up is called a maned wolf. And if you've never seen a picture of one, it's just essentially a lean wolf with really, really long legs, like think giraffe legs almost. It's just an odd looking creature, very tall, and I'm almost positive those don't live near me. So I don't know what that was. I wouldn't venture to say that it was paranormal, ghost, spirit, but it was very weird. And that's the stories I have. Just hope you enjoyed my stories, and hopefully I can hear them on the next podcast.
And this next story is from Amy in Seattle, Washington. The House on Somerville Drive. I live in Seattle now, but I grew up in a suburb of St. Louis, Missouri. Our house was built in the late 70s, and my parents lived there with my 2 brothers for a couple of years before I came along in 1980. Shortly after moving in, my mother recalls getting into bed one night, and just as she was about to turn over to go to sleep, she saw her grandmother standing at the end of the bed, smiling at her. She said she wasn't scared, but it was very strange for her to be there. Considering my mother and her family had immigrated from the UK on the Queen Mary in the 1950s, and she hadn't seen her grandmother since leaving England, she turned to tell my father that her grandmother was there. But when she looked back, she had disappeared. The next morning they received a call that her grandmother had passed away the night before. Everyone in my immediate family had a number of experiences during the time we lived there, but no one talked about it until years later. We moved out in 1991 and sold the house to my aunt, uncle, and their 2 children, at which time they began having their own experiences. Most of what happened in the house was the typical ghost story stuff. Phantom footsteps walking up the stairs and continuing down the hallway, lights going on and off on their own, items going missing and then reappearing in strange places. The dog would sometimes jump up for no reason and scurry under the dining room table, where she'd sit and shiver and bark. She'd also sometimes whine while watching some invisible thing moving back and forth across the ceiling. Occasionally, we'd hear loud noises. Sometimes it sounded like a shelf full of canned goods had collapsed, or a plate in the sink full of dishes had slipped and caused the rest to come crashing down. But of course, upon inspection, nothing would be out of place. I remember having a sense of there being 2 different entities in the house, one of a warm, protective nature, and another more malevolent. My brothers have both talked at length about feeling a negative energy when they entered the room at night. This was shortly followed by a protective energy. They both have said they've experienced the feeling of someone sitting on the end of their beds, only to look up and see no one was there. My cousins would sometimes come over to stay. One said that one night he was sleeping over, he woke up because he suddenly felt freezing in the room. When he opened his eyes and sat up, he saw a white mist rolling in and covered the entire floor. Another night, when I was probably 5 or 6, my father was out of town on a business trip, so I slept with my mother in their room. The feeling of someone tapping on my shoulder awakened me, and when I rolled over to see who it was, I saw a hooded, shadowy figure floating near the end of the bed. I shut my eyes tight and pulled the covers over my head, praying that it would go away. But when I peeked out from under the blankets, the figure had moved closer to the side of my bed. Terrified, I continued to hide under the covers until I eventually fell back to sleep. I also had a reoccurring experience that I still cannot explain. Sometimes I would be in the bathroom. I would open the mirrored medicine cabinet above the sink to retrieve my toothbrush or whatever, and when I'd close the door, a man would appear, staring back at me. He was a dark-haired, pale-skinned man, with a face that was horribly mangled, as if he'd been in some sort of accident. I would scream at the sight and burst into tears, but in a flash he'd be gone. For obvious reasons, I was terrified of looking in that mirror. But time would pass, and I'd forget about it, or convince myself that it never really happened, and it would happen again. This went on for years until we moved away. Many years later, my parents recounted the story of a night when they both saw the same apparition at different times. They were watching TV in their bedroom, and occasionally one would get up to fetch a snack or a drink from the kitchen. On their way down the hallway, they would come to the bathroom and see the light was on. They reached in and turned off the light, then continued to the kitchen. But on the way back to the bedroom, the light in the bathroom would be on again. They didn't think much of it at the time. They assumed one of my brothers had gotten up to use it and neglected to turn the light off before heading back to bed. Anyone who knew my father knows that this must have irritated him, as he was always yelling about how he didn't work so hard to light the whole neighborhood. The last time it happened, my father reached in to turn off the light while cursing under his breath, and saw a woman in a long flowing white gown brushing her hair in front of the mirror. Yes, that mirror. As my mom tells the story, my dad then abandoned her and went bowling with a friend. Like I said, my family moved out of the house in 1991, at which point my other aunt and her family moved in. The older of my two cousins said that she would occasionally hear music coming from the heating vents on the floor. Other times, the family would come home to find all the doors in the house closed and their dog crying and locked inside one of the bedrooms. My younger cousin, who was about 3 years old at the time, went through a period when he would wake up his parents every night with screaming, and when they'd run in and ask what was wrong, he would say that he had seen a naked woman in the closet. I've often wondered if it was the same woman my parents had seen in the bathroom years earlier, and that the naked part was just a 3-year-old's way of trying to describe her sort of misty, transparent appearance. My uncle, who you could describe as a super macho construction worker type, told us that he was home alone once, installing some shelves in the bedroom closet. Yes, the same closet, and heard someone come over to the front door and walk up the stairs. He said he called out, but no one answered. When he went to see who had come to the home, he reached the bottom of the stairs, and at that point, he felt someone take his hand in theirs. He said it scared him at first, but it kept on happening, and from that day on, every time he would go to the bottom of the stairs, he'd feel someone take his hand and escort him across the living room to the laundry room or garage or wherever he was going. He said it became so routine that he'd just say, "Okay, here I am," and off they'd go across the room together.
Hello, Lex, and Anything Ghost listeners. My name is Rajiv, and this is not my own story. Rather, it's the story of my best friend who I've known since we were awkward 11-year-olds with badly dyed hair and too large jeans. Corinne comes from a southern family. I'm talking collard greens, black-eyed peas, and macaroni-style southern. She was breastfed by the lore of things eerie and supernatural. I'm from a Caribbean Indian heritage and also suckled on legends of supernatural beings like Churel, Jambi, and Fairas. As kids, among our favorite things to do was to burn incense and talk about past lives, magic, and spirituality. Corinne was fascinated with Buddhist beliefs of reincarnation, impermanence, and presence. I fell into an obsession with Hindu lore, connecting with my ancestry, thinking of Rakshas, Bhut, and Pisach. "Do you think there are any spirits around?" I would ask her. "Let's see what the runes say," was her common response. And I believed it too. Come Halloween time, we would read runes or tarot cards to each other, reach out to the spirits that we believed were all around us, and ask them for guidance in the new spiritual year. We would bring each other our stories of strange occurrences and interpret them for each other, whether it was a spooky noise or a dream that left either of us unhinged. As we grew up into our doctorate degrees, Corinne believed less and less in the things that can't be proven with empirical evidence. Her head now belonged to the universe of the scientific method. She'd say, "Until I can see it, count it, and reproduce it through testing a theory, I won't believe it." Sound, for sure. My beliefs have not stayed the same. In fact, I think a belief is like sand held in the palm too tightly. When you finally hold on for a long time and open up to see what remains, you'll find all the sand has slowly slipped through your fingers. I'm still swimming in an affective sea, where feelings, pinpricks at the back of your neck, and gooseflesh are telltale signs of beings around us, watching us, rooting for or cursing us. I've had my experiences and I hold them close. This is not the story of ancestors coming to visit me or weirdly timed coincidences. It's about closing your eyes and opening them, about believing something, then not believing it, and finally opening yourself to wonder. I presently live in Alabama, in the southernmost reaches of the Appalachian cultural area, and am in Muskogee or Creek country. The United States has a long history of the genocide of indigenous people. The forests, lakes, and hills archive this trauma, catalog the red blood of native folks. There is also a grim history of terror wrought on African American people in this area. It's poetic that if you dig a little earth, the clay will stain your fingers auburn. Corinne used to live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, another place with a history of oppression and magic. A few weeks ago, prior to moving away, a message popped up on her phone that read, "Looking for a lunch spot? Try Pisgah National Forest." Strange, she thought. How did it know I'm moving to Boone, North Carolina in a matter of days? And who just goes to eat lunch in the middle of the forest? It must be some kind of algorithm that charts what I search for on the internet. It's true. Before moving, she was looking at images of the town constantly and kept a screen up with Boone views as she went about her other work. Moving to Boone a few days later was a dream come true for her family, as it was a return to a physical, cultural connection. Both Corinne and her husband have hundreds of years of ancestry in the surrounding areas. German, Irish, Scottish, and English immigrants who established new lives in the American South, subjugating and killing indigenous and African American people along the way. In modern day, Corinne's photos and video chats reveal the idyllic, bucolic setting, her home perched on a mountain overlooking a snowy scene from a postcard. The bare trees stark in their chiaroscuro contrast to the velvet of frost all around. Pisgah is Hebrew for mountain or summit and appears in the Bible, the mountain that God called Moses to in order to view the Promised Land. It originally, in North Carolina, was Cherokee and Catawba land before the American government tried to erase them and their history. Since relocating, Corinne has found several restaurants with southern flair that she is a fool for. Her phone suggests, try lunch at Pisgah National Forest. Okay, seriously, why would I want to eat in the forest? I mean, I get that this town is close to so many granola types, and yes, a picnic would be wonderful, but how about not when it's freezing outside? She thought and dismissed the message with vague disgust. If it could know where she was, why didn't it take the weather into account? While driving around with her husband and kids, they found grits, shrimp, okra, barbecue, all of which delighted and reaffirmed her desire to remain in those hills until she grows old, and has had to dye her hair for real. There was something strange, though. Her cell phone would buzz. Again, Pisgah National Forest. It was supposed to recommend brunch places to her. Some new astounding feature of technology, mapping, and perhaps governmental spying. Though, what the phone recommended was lunch in Pisgah National Forest, over and over and over. She deleted the notification. This has been going on for way too long, she said, and then texted me. I got so annoyed with it a couple of days ago because I have no desire for a forest lunch. so I turned off the setting where it suggests places. Except, it is still suggesting Pisgah National Forest for lunch. What's in this forest? Corinne wondered, brushing back her lilac hair. A quick Google search revealed sites that read, Native American haunting of the Pisgah National Forest, North Carolina. 4 truly terrifying Blue Ridge adventures to have this Halloween. And Haunted Asheville, North Carolina's official travel site. Were the spirits beckoning her into the woods? If she goes, who will be waiting there? She texted me right away to let me know of what happened, as she does when strange things used to happen to her, when she could still see the magic around her. I called her at once. No answer. She knew I'd be interested in these things, being, well, spiritual and a little into creepy things. When I finally reached her, I asked, "What do you think this means? What is it about? Is it a joke?" Silence. After a while, she spoke. "I don't know. I'm sure there's a rational explanation for this. But it sure is creepy. Was it an ancestor? A restless spirit of a body wronged in life? A divine spirit seeking to show Corinne the entirety of her new mountain paradise, as though she were Moses? An opening in Corinne's mind parted its teeth, and now draws her into speculation. Something that hasn't happened in years and years. Questions flood our conversations, and I clutch my runestones tight as I light my sandalwood incense. Whatever or whomever beckons her to the stark forest line of the Appalachian Mountains, whether wild haint or jumbie, she will be aware and be watching, burning her own incense from now on, her blue-gray eyes open wide.
And that's it for Anything Ghost number 243. Thanks everybody for all your stories. Again, if you have a story you want to share, send it to lex@anythingghost.com or go to the Anything Ghost website, www.anythingghost.com, and fill out the form there. And for everything Anything Ghost, go to anythingghost.com, and don't forget about the VIP group if you want complete access to the Anything Ghost archives and an early release of each show before it's released to the whole world. Okay, everybody, have yourself a wonderful